Jimmy, I got to know relatively late in Jimmy's career. I was aware of him from recordings, and I really, really liked him. My good friend Gary Giddens and I kind of shared a admiration, Jimmy Rowles Admiration Society. But when I got to know him, uh, was when he, settled in New York, and he had a relationship then with Sloane, who was a friend of mine. Carol wrote for me for a while at Downbeat. She'd do record reviews. She was a very good writer. She was very good, very bright lady who is still with us and still singing. I think I haven't heard her in a long time. So, well, because Carol is still with us, I can't. But well, they had a joint drinking problem, so that's why didn't last. But when they were together, they were wonderful, and it was my misfortune when I put together one of my rare opportunities to do something for my good friend George Wayne. He let me produce a concert at Newport in New York. I had this idea that I'd had for years to do a series of duets, and one of them was supposed to be Carol and Jimmy, but at that point, just before that, they had fallen out, so it turned out to be Carol and a very good piano player whose name escapes me at the moment. He's still around, although he's well up in years, but it wasn't quite the same. Anyway, Jimmy, amazing thing about Jimmy was his knowledge of tunes. He was the man who knew 1,000 tunes and knew them exactly. I mean, he would know the verse, and of course I love his singing. He was a great singer. No voice, but great singing. And he knew the lyrics, and just amazing, just totally amazing. But the thing about Jimmy, though, is that I interviewed him. It's one of the interviews in that series of interviews that's sitting at the Institute that were done for National Endowment for the Arts. And I asked him because he had worked closely with Zoot Sims, especially. He made a whole series of recordings for Pablo where he got Zoot to play tunes he'd never played before. Al Cohn and Stan Getz. So I asked him about the three of them, and he had some interesting insights. And they were three very different people, in spite of it. All come from Lester Young. I also had the good luck of being present at the session that Stan did, where he featured Jimmy, and that was a very interesting session. I wound up doing notes for. So Jimmy was just I don't think he ever played anything on a record that wasn't worth listening to more than once, I mean, he just was such a remarkably wonderful player, both as a soloist and in an ensemble, and as an accompanist to singers, and just all around. And he also had a great sense of humor, and was a very, he was a great guy to hang out with, but left us much too soon. And the two people who were important in his early career were Lester Young and Ben Webster. He was in Lester's band at Billy Berg's in California, and he had himself forgotten about that because the recordings were never issued until much later, and I guess he wasn't aware of it, because when I asked him about it, when I told him about it, he said no, he said that didn't happen, but it did, because records exist. It was Ben who brought him to his first recording session, which was Slim Gaillard. And it was Ben who brought him to the session. And the records are fine, but they never got issued until, like 30 years later or something, and Jimmy had forgotten about them. I think he eventually did get to hear them.
He's amazing, even when he's very young. I'm going to mess this up, but there's I think a Timmy Rogers record, maybe 1944, and Jimmy Rowles is in the band, and it's one of these army things, bring enough clothes for 3 days, and he takes a solo, and he's instantly recognizable.
Yeah. Timmy Rogers was, I got to see him, I saw him at the Apollo. He was a funny guy. But the thing about Jimmy is that here is a white guy who was really taken under the wings of black guys, who sponsored him, and that's the wonderful thing about jazz. I think jazz, it's not emphasized enough, even by people who are involved in the music and should know this. I mean, jazz is where black and white really got together in American life, and it starts early, and it was unique when even in the 20s, and if you look back, maybe even before that. And it's the first time we really see black and white together in public, and on the screen too. We saw at Hollywood Hotel, where you had the Benny Goodman Quartet. Yeah. They're all dressed the same. Benny doesn't even look like he's the leader. There's four of them. They're equals, and there they are. So that's before everybody talks about, not to take anything away from Jackie Robinson, and baseball is the great American game, but jazz is where it started. And that was very important to me, because when I knew that I was coming to America, because my father had, come here in 1941, and it was when he became a citizen, he was able to bring my mother and me over, and we always knew that this was going to happen eventually, as soon as I was very much into things American, and one of the things, because of my experiences of, unfortunately, family members and others from the Holocaust, I was very much aware of what was then called the Negro problem, and I read Gunnar Myrdal's book, and all the other things I could put my hands on, and because of the jazz thing, I was very much aware of that. So this was important to me when I came here, and I had experiences that taught me lessons. When I got drafted, I did my basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia, which was near Columbus, which billed itself as they had posters, the South's most progressive city. Yeah, progressive, my ass. To that. Should I talk about that, or is that off limits? It is jazz involved. Very few jazz fans in my outfit, which was a field artillery battalion that had been National Guard from West Virginia, that had been activated and was augmented with people from New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Connecticut, and from the Deep South, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. What a mix. all thrown together. No, and this was before. Now, while I was in the Army was when Truman's integration order, which actually dated from 1948, was finally being enforced, and we got this insertion of African Americans. It was very interesting. But what I was going to say, in terms of jazz, then eventually we got stationed. This is very ironic, I got to Columbus, Georgia, and that's where I learned about, the realities of segregation. Not so much that you would notice it in the center of town in everyday life, but there were a couple of us who were jazz-minded, and we had these, in the Army you have day rooms, where you can hang out, have pool tables and pinball machines and whatever, and phonograph. So we wanted to get some jazz records, the two of us. My friend was a dress salesman from Brooklyn. He was an amazing guy, but that's a whole other story. Anyway, we found record store in the center of Columbus, Georgia. They had no jazz at all to speak of. I mean, they had whatever came out on Columbia and Victor, but I forgot, we're talking 1951. There was nothing really happening. But then there was a black unit not too far from us, and we were not supposed to socialize or anything like that. But my friend, the guy from Brooklyn, he was very adventurous. He actually decided to go over. It was within walking distance, maybe a 20-minute walk or something like that. He walked over to the black unit and, introduced himself. He said, "You should see their day room. This is the difference night and day between theirs and ours." And they told him about a hip record store in Columbus called Dr. Jive. So we went there, and sure enough, they had everything, jazz at the Philharmonic, all this stuff, the dogs, whatever you wanted. And guys were hanging out there, were jazz fans, and it was fun. So we started going there on our days off, when we had a pass or whatever, until one fine day we were a couple of white guys were obviously not, the normal, with hats on. They were plainclothes cops, and they got the two of us, and said, "Come on, come with us," and put us in the back of a car, which was unmarked police car, and drove us out of the black section back into the main part. And while that was going on, one of them gave us a lecture, which said, in effect, well, you guys are from up north, and when you're up there, you can do anything you want, but when you're down here, this and that and the other. Long and the short of it was, if we ever catch you here again, said, by the time we deliver you to the MPs, they're not going to be able to recognize you. Very nice. Yeah. So we took that to heart, and we didn't go back. But there were other things which have nothing to do with jazz. But anyway, that was. But what I really wanted to say was that it was with jazz that it opened up that whole aspect of American life, and it was a blessing, because that's where I learned about great things to eat. Like there was a place in Harlem, Sherman's Barbecue. They had the best potato salad I ever had in my life. That's the greatest.
Well, on that memory, we'll hold for a second.